Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of Token Podcast. I'm your host and sometimes referee, Zach Stat Pearson, and today I'm joined by he who loves horror, he who has shaped his soul around that which gives all of us fear, and of course, anything involving a slasher fic, if not Evil Dead itself. S.A Bradley.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Zach, for such a wonderful opening. I've never had one quite like that, so that's wonderful, and I'm pleased to be on this show.
Okay, well, first and foremost, why don't you tell people where they can find you?
Sure. If you're looking for the stuff that I do, I am a podcaster as well as an author. My podcast is known as Hellbent for Horror. It's a podcast about everything related to horror movies. I talk about horror as an art form, as a social commentary. I think it's very important for that kind of thing. I think what I do is I talk about movies, I talk about books, I talk about music even, murder ballads, going all the way back to the earliest times that music was used in the church to show good and evil. I'll talk about stories that shape me. I talk about stories that shape horror itself from the community and from social side. I look at it as a film style. I also look at it as a commentary on everyday life. You can find Hellbent for Horror on anywhere that you normally listen to your podcasts, including Spotify, et cetera, et cetera. And all of those different places, there's a spot for you to be able to find it. And I also have a book called Screaming for Pleasure, How Horror Makes You Happy and Healthy. And it's really a love letter to all things that are related to horror, things that go bump in the night. I talk about how horror not only reinvents itself for every generation to look at every generation's specific anxieties, but also how it can be healing as well as thrilling, which usually starts up a pretty good conversation. Because I'm here to remind you that you used to love horror movies, you secretly still do.
I kind of think that you're right, at least in my aspect, but we'll get into that later because I'm one of those unusual people when it comes to research and development, not necessarily for the podcasts or for interviews, but I think, I don't remember his name, but I had a professor that told me, there's like, Mr. Pearson, I promise you in a past life, you were possibly a PhD holding student with a sociology and an anthropology degree. It's like, bro, I'm an art student. What are you talking about? It hit me months and years later. He's like, you actually want to study the human condition to the point where it seems like something you would get a career in. But I didn't.
Well, when I was a kid, it was the idea that I was just, I needed to argue everything. So when I was growing up, horror movies were, horror movies were like the ghetto, the terrible place that you would go, the smelly dungeon that you had to be some kind of weirdo to want to watch horror movies. It was considered lower in entertainment. Not like it's high entertainment at this point, but it was really considered beneath the artist. And so I grew up at a time when people still really believed that movies could change the world, that you could have a social change come through a movie. And so I started arguing at an early age. Well, I see this for this. So what argument does when you look like an idiot in front of people, you start doing research. So it can never, ever happen again. And I think that's kind of how I've lived my life, is that I was one of those people who my dad gave me a set of encyclopedias when I was young to shut me up because I was grounded a lot. And when I was grounded, I read the encyclopedia and started with dirty words and then finding another one. And then I started really just a deep dive into what was going on. So I always felt information. I could at least confuse people, if nothing else, to get myself through some arguments. And the argument becomes passion. So I hear you on that. I love when I meet fellow doctorates that don't have the degrees.
Yeah, I'm very curious. So, and this is just coming from, me being in the beginning of the CD era. I ain't old, but I ain't young either. Did you get World Book for your birthday at any point? Because I did.
That was World Book. That was it. I had the Funk and Wagnall. It was in the late 70s, I guess, early 80s. And I was grounded all the time. And my dad was just like, my dad was functionally illiterate. He didn't really know a lot of reading. He could understand words by how they worked in a position. Like he understood stop signs and stuff like that. But if he needed to read, he lost himself. So he always looked at reading as like punishment. So that was the great thing for me, was that I found that my freedom from a rather oppressive childhood through books, because my dad didn't think they were dangerous. He thought they were boring. And then, wow, the book, my first corruption really came from books.
That's That's something that could be on a shirt. My first corruption came from books. I kind of want that on a shirt now. Dude, for me, hey, just be thankful he didn't give you algebra books. I hate math still.
Algebra is about when I lost my belief in math. I mean,
But that works too.
Yeah.
Right,
I mean, I was like, wow.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get into it. First and foremost, what's your most recent book about, and what would you like for readers to learn or feel from your book that you didn't already kind of sort of state?
Well, my most recent book, I basically do this storyline where I want people to take a look at the way that horror can be as beneficial as any other way that we look to help ourselves on that internal journey that we've got. I look at like what Carl Jung talked about with the shadow self. We have the personae, which is me having a nice smile, trying to be friends. Yeah, right. And then we get to the point where there's the shadow self. And the shadow self is this primal thing that's inside of all of us. It's that animalistic, it's that dark side. And we all have it. And what Jung would talk about is that it is something that needs to be taken and given attention. A lot of us try to pretend that we don't have it, or we ignore it because it's not always wonderful to look at that side of us. But he says, you can ignore the shadow self at your peril, because it will get your attention like a spoiled brat. And that's when people get divorced and they get caught up in, all sorts of schemes, and they end up on TMZ because they've not found an outlet for this thing that's inside of them. But for me, it really started early, where I was kind of in a traumatic childhood, and horror helped me get some control. So when I talk about what is inside of the book, it's taking a look at horror as more than just something that just scares you, right? It has a purpose. It's not something that you can put in any different situation. And I don't say that horror movies can cure your lumbago, or you should get off your meds and start watching Friday the 13th. But I say that it takes care of the small stuff inside of us that's hard to articulate, kind of like music. Music does this thing for us where if you hear one or two chords from your favorite song, you brighten up. You don't even have to know the words. It goes past the intellect. It goes right to this primal part of us and exercises some demons we don't even know how to talk to somebody about. I can go to a psychiatrist and he can go, "What's wrong with me? What's wrong with you?" And I'll go, "Bleh. I don't know what to call the thing that's in me." But when I have horror movies, it just is able to let me have a sense of control in a world that is out of control. It's a dangerous world out there. It's a scary world out there. I have no control over what's going to happen, but I have control over this fear that I can have in a horror movie. If I hit pause, that's okay. But if I make it through, I feel like I've done something. And so it was a place where I could find some control. It also gave me a tribe, a group of people that felt like me. It let me look at a part of myself and realize that I wasn't that bad. And it gave me a sense of play. As you get older, you lose the sense of play. The world wants to make you serious, and you can't take this stuff that seriously. It always has a sense of I'm allowing this inner part of me, this child, to grow a little bit, to discover. And I think that one of the things that horror does really well is the power of allegory and metaphor, where you can have a parable. And I think horror is the second oldest story ever told around the campfire. The first one is, "Welcome, everybody. We love you. Thank you for being family. Thank you, gods, for giving us food and everything." And the second one is, "Don't go in the woods alone. You will die." And that is how we find our cautionary tale. And I think it's something that allows us to look at the monster without speaking the monster. And what I mean by that is monsters are metaphors. Every monster is a metaphor. It's standing in for something that we don't want to talk about, or something that is, if we talked about it, people might turn away from us. Politics, sexuality, whatever it might be. We might not want to talk about that directly, but a horror movie allows us to talk about it and not talk about it and get it. And so those are the kind of things that I mentioned in my book.
Yeah, because I can tell just from, ironically, my study on humanity, North America, at least around the 50s, 60s era, we had a long history of implied things through horror movies like The Red Menace. No, that was just shitting on Russia. It was literally just shitting on the concept of Russia.
Oh
And
yeah.
yeah, and then like some of the writers and directors like didn't even deny it. But
Oh
then
no.
you give that to a small children. In fact, one of the biggest cases, I think it is Guillermo del Toro, whoever directed The Shape of Water. He
Yes.
didn't get the fear of African Americans from the original version. He got the underdog or the guy that was different being bullied and harassed, but still finding love. He saw it as a love story almost, or a sad love crisis. And then he converted it into basically what he thought as a child of it as a love story. So, I mean, it's the oldest thing in time. Sometimes the most dangerous or horrible events or people can inspire the most noble of hearts. And
Absolutely.
there is nothing more true about that to me than just learning history. Like I can tell you right now, on paper, and I stress this, on paper, Gandhi seems like a very noble person, and basing your life off of some of the beliefs he had, and I stress the term some of the beliefs he had, is okay, and I understand that. But the man was profoundly racist, and he was obsessed with sexualizing his biological 13-year-old niece. So obviously you take the fucked up with the good, but you remember not to go into that dark path.
Right. Well, that's something that I talk about a lot, which is horror is something that people really get nervous about. What are we talking about? We're straddling a line of is this something that is decent to speak of, or is it not? And my thing is that horror has a very specific use, and horror isn't here to share half of its lunch with you at recess. That's not its point. Its point is kind of like the hero's journey, where we're going to be able to speak about the thing that is somewhat unspeakable and release that stuff. Like when you talked about the 50s and the Red Scare, my favorite example is Invasion of the Body Snatchers, because that's a movie that was directed by a guy who was very anti-communist. It was written by a guy who was blacklisted. Now, blacklisting was when they basically said, you're a communist and you couldn't work. That was cancel culture. That was way before. Yeah,
I was about to say
way
that.
before. And so all of that stuff of blacklisting and things like that happened. And this guy wrote this story. So he was working with basically his opponent. The director would be his opponent, a guy who made movies about the communists taking over the world. And then there was the writer of the original story, who was just coming up with a science fiction idea because these things sell money. If you watch Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the original one, the reason I think it's a masterpiece is that people will define it or translate it depending upon how they feel. So you can watch that movie and look at it and say, this is anti-McCarthyism, which was the blacklisting. Or you can legitimately also say, this is about communism taking over the country. Depending upon where you were looking or how you came to the movie, you could get either message out of it. And that's when subtext is really juicy, when it really works, because that helps you talk about the story. That gets you into the discussion with the other person because they can see something there. And so I think that that's something that's important. But I also think that I'm more about and statements than or statements in how I deal with stuff these days. So instead of my way or the highway, I say, well, there's somewhere in between my way and highway. Let's talk about this. So for me, it's like, say something as hotly controversial as, say, Birth of a Nation, what I think is a horror movie from beginning and end. And should it disappear? Oh yeah, I mean that's
the
being
nicest thing I've heard it be called.
The horrifying thing is me growing up going that this is people saying this is a masterpiece. This is the first Hollywood movie that truly shows the genius of what cinema can do. Woodrow Wilson, the president, was someone who endorsed it at the time. That's the real horror of it, is that I grew up with a time when we weren't being honest about what was in that damn movie. And now we are. And so I piss people off by calling it a horror movie because they denigrate horror, right? They want to talk about it as something else. But my thing is, I'm all for having, every time that movie gets brought up, that there is a litany of all its atrocities stuck to it. So that gets the story told. So it doesn't disappear. And then somewhere down the line, some people start whispering, going, well, people made a big deal out of this movie, but it's really not that bad. No. Let it be seen, and then your face falls off when you see just how horrifyingly racist the movie is, and then you bring up the history of it. That keeps the thing of, this is a mistake we made, And we need to press on that. I think that that's a thing that should be done a lot. We worry a lot. Can I like this person anymore? Can I watch this anymore? And I think for the rest of our time, the movie should be tainted by what that person did, but that the movie's still there. Context is probably one of the most important things, because I think that it's important that we don't do my way or the highway. I think we have to fess up to this stuff. We have to feel how ugly it is. By every time we talk about Rosemary's Baby, we got to talk about the director statutorily raping somebody. Hey, guess what? This is an ugly world, and we need to be able to own that at some point.
Yeah, the only absolutes are anything that's not humane, because we are unstable. Yeah. The earth doesn't need humans to exist. We just would like it to.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I always love, there was an old comedian, George Carlin.
Oh, man, I love that guy. Don't get me started. We'd be here all day.
Yeah, I love when he talks about the earth and he goes, save the earth. The earth ain't going anywhere. We are. And he says, take a look at the people of Pompeii all going like this, frozen under lava, and ask them if they feel like a threat to the planet today. And I was like, yeah. And I think, we're living through a little bit of the planet going, you know what? These guys are getting fucking irritating. I think I'm just going to throw something at them that they won't be able to stop coughing.
That would be a good concept for a horror novel.
Yeah, I think that's been in many horror novels and the Bible. I mean, the idea of plague. Someday a plague is going to wash.
Old Testament is literally nightmare fuel. And this is coming from the guy who is both not an atheist and not a Catholic. Supposedly the best term for me I've heard is a deist. I can acknowledge that there is a possibility of a God, but that God probably doesn't give a shit about you, me, or what happens tomorrow and any day after that. Because if he did, I'm pretty sure he would have kicked every human's ass by now.
Yeah, well, I think that's a very interesting thing. When I talked about having
Testament, it fucking terrified me. It gave me literal nightmares.
That's probably one of the first ways I got into horror. When I talked about a rough life in the beginning, I grew up, my parents got in a fundamentalist cult that believed that the world was going to end in 1975, and that my responsibility was to save all of my friends by telling them to get rid of their religion, which was lying to them, and come to the truthful one that was based on math and shit. And it was just crazy living in that.
This literally just may be the best interview, and we're not even like halfway through it, that's ever been done on this entire podcast. I'm gonna just call it right now.
Yeah, it was amazing, and they made me believe in demons. Like, demons are right here waiting for me to sin. I'm so damn important that the supernatural beings have to try and tempt me. But that was what I kind of grew up with, and so I believed a lot of that, all of it, until 1976, when the world didn't end. My family stayed in that thing, and I was kind of stuck in a household that I didn't believe in the God that they were telling me about, and so I went through a lot of changes through the decades to be where I am now, which is I'm okay, you're okay about that stuff. But I am always wary of people who tell me that there's truth and good news. And that's where I am right now. I think I'm watching a world obsessed. They're in a cult and they don't know it. People talk like they're in a cult now. And I hear the cult discussions.
Totally agree. Like, it's an author. Like, I don't know how to get in contact with him, but I would love to. He even got on a Hulu show that Sarah Silverman used to do, but of course they told the truth, so it got canceled. There's actually a deconverted neo-Nazi who literally made a book explaining that pretty much since the orange pumpkin Trump showed up, that he was basically amassing his own little hate cult, because a lot of these anti-whatever groups started rebranding themselves, but they had the exact same rhetoric and words and ideals from when he was little in like the 80s and the 90s. And I honestly felt for that dude, but I would love to have him on, because he said one of the most truest things I've ever seen about anybody. Half the things that people think, and I'm paraphrasing, I don't want to ruin his words, so I'm going to just say right now I'm paraphrasing. Half the terrible thoughts that people have or think about other people aren't actually based in fact. They're based on hearing it from someone else and someone not telling them, hey, they're full of shit. The
right, confirmation bias.
Yes, confirmation bias. which they don't even teach in school till the college years, and not many. Well, this is North America. Not everybody's going to college, so that terrifies me even more.
Right. Well, it's a disturbing world in that way, and that confirmation bias is huge. My goodness, there was something that you said that made me. This is once again my thing on context. Bad guys love when there's no context. When you can say things like, "I think it's a shame that we can't just agree to disagree," is bullshit. Agree to disagree works when we're talking about the Steelers versus the Cleveland Browns. Okay, no problem with context with that being where we can hate our beliefs, but then at the end of the day, we can love each other. Even religion, as long as it's nothing more than what goes on in the pulpit on the Sundays, I can agree to disagree. Where it turns into something different is when we try to use lack of context to say that that's a blanket statement. And I'll tell you what, if you can't just still be friends because your friend is a neo-Nazi, I don't know what to say to you. No, you know what works? Getting rid of neo-Nazis. You know what doesn't work? Sitting there and saying, you know what, I'm okay, you're okay, it's all right. Because nothing has to happen, right? Nothing has to happen to the Nazi. He doesn't have to change one thing. He gets to say everything that he wants. He gets to do everything that he wants. And he can just say, can't we all just get along? I feel a little bit like I'm just misunderstood. The other person who's saying that, I can still be a friend of a guy who's like that, because I'm his friend and I see a part of him that you don't see. Well, obviously it's not hurting you either. And that's the thing. When we talk in that, there's no context of how, like the whole thing that's happening with Moss right now, and how that book's being banned, and people are, getting a little bit hot and bothered about people wanting to censor the banners or go against the banners, cancel people who are banning, and it's like, oh, don't you see the hypocrisy of that? It's like, no. See, here's the problem: they're doing bad. We don't sit there and say, well, you know what, theft happens to everybody. The guy can come in the house and steal. No, there are certain things that we say on a moral level I cannot like. So if you're going to sit there and say, this guy is a Nazi, yeah, let's finish the sentence. The guy's a Nazi who hates Jews and wishes that they died, and probably has racism issues as well, and probably only promotes whites and truly believes that other races are forcing his race from being supreme. That's the whole sentence. Let's not just call it Nazi. I don't say alt-right. I don't say neoconservative. I say Nazi. I say racist, because that's what I grew up with them being called. They started to rebrand, and that's once again good old George Carlin, right? George Carlin had this whole thing about war. He said in World War I, people had, they couldn't believe what was happening. They went into deep shock. They couldn't come back to regular life, and it was called shell shock. He said 2 syllables, shell shock. It's like a rifle going off. He goes, then we get to the Korean War, and it becomes battle fatigue. Oh, I'm a little tired now, just a little. Yep, and then post-traumatic stress syndrome. We add syllables to get ourselves away from the pain, away from the truth. We turn the words around. We make it so that it seems sterile. And then that thing that is killing people doesn't seem so bad. We can ignore that. We can ignore that. We can ignore post-traumatic stress syndrome. It sounds like something you just have a Tums and it's going to be okay. But shell shock, we know that we've caused someone great pain with our desires to move things forward. So, yeah, I guess we should probably talk about horror, huh?
What is more horrible than humanity? But since you've decided to segue us back that way, we're going to go to number 3 because technically you've answered number 2 twice, basically your father. What is your favorite horror movie and why? If that's even possible to figure out what your favorite one is, given that you're a connoisseur.
Yeah, thanks so much for saying if it's possible, because it's really, every time I'm asked that question, I die a little because it's like,
And some other movie you love. Yeah, I've been there.
Yeah. Yeah, there are all so many, they're like kids, but there's also, horror is such a wide umbrella. I still use the term horror. I'm not that big on saying anything more than subgenres after I say horror, like a slasher film and stuff like that. But I'm not big on like elevated horror. I'm not into post horror. I don't like these things that separate, because I think that that's almost like an elitist thing to do. It's kind of like the velvet rope. But I'll get to that. And why that becomes hard is that there's so many subgenres. If you ask me what my favorite zombie movie is, I could still only come up with maybe two, because there's always an argument about that. But if you say my favorite horror movie of all time, it's really rough. I will say the one that probably got me into horror. In my book, I have this idea that I call the first kiss. The first kiss with horror isn't the first horror movie that you see. It's the first horror movie that impacts you. Like your first kiss, it can be ugly. It can be clumsy. It may not go the way you want. You might have nightmares for 3 days, but it's the movie that
totally
feels like
that to me.
Yeah, there you go, right? For me, it was something thoroughly unexpected. It's an art movie, and it was just because it was on HBO back when HBO was just starting out, so they would give it free to a bunch of places as a test audience thing to see if it would catch on. And I happened to be in the East Coast, and they were doing it around the tri-state area. I was in Pennsylvania. It just so happened I was in this area where they were showing stuff, and they would put anything on. They were like, "We don't have any standards. We're just trying to make it, bruh, and we're only on 8 hours a day." So they would put any kind of like exploitation film, action film. They have disaster movies, and one that they had on in the middle of the day was an R-rated horror movie called Don't Look Now. And it's a ghost story more than anything. But the first 5 minutes is infamous. People who have seen it will go, "Oh," because it was a movie that it was Christopher Nolan before there was Christopher Nolan. It was kind of like, I'm trying to think of other people who have like this really disturbing head trippy horror idea or science fiction idea. Yeah, so you had this thing where this child drowns in a pond at this family estate, and the parents are inside playing around with each other. But it's done in this way, in slow motion. It's done with premonition coming into it. It's done in nonlinear time, and it's shaky camera at certain points, and it's weirdly beautiful. And so when they find the daughter has drowned, there's this slow motion shot where the father comes up from under the water, and water's spraying in the air, and he's screaming, and his hair is matted over his face. All you can see is his mouth screaming, and that paralyzed me for like 3 days. For 3 nights, I couldn't tell my dad what was wrong, because I get my ass whipped for watching an R-rated HBO movie at 8. But I saw this thing, and it scared me to death. And I now realize, I didn't get it at that moment, that what scared me wasn't the girl drowned. It was the parents aren't going to save you. And that was important because my parents were secretly going through a very, very ugly and violent divorce. And I just knew my world was kind of falling apart. And so this movie spoke to me, even though I didn't know it was speaking to me. It also made me feel that if this could affect me, they don't make movies just for me. There must be other people in this pain boat too. And so I needed to watch the movie again, even though it scared me to death, even though I had nightmares for 3 days. And then I felt a little bit better. I don't know if I would say stronger, but I felt like I had conquered something that really scared me in a world that was out of control. The big adults were changing my life. I had no say, and I didn't know what was going to happen. When you're an 8-year-old, you're like, what do? Leave me on the side of the road if mom and dad aren't together? What does that even mean? And so it was really a disturbing time of my life, well, along with being in a cult and all this shit. So horror just kind of landed right there. So if I had to say there was the most influential thing, was that movie got me into horror. Yeah, and the most influential that made me really say I can stay with horror forever was John Carpenter's Halloween. When that movie came out,
a classic. Even I've seen that one.
Oh yeah, that's like a rite of passage, and I know it's slow and it's it's like a cliche-ridden thing. When it first came out, it wasn't. It kind of freed us from that. But the thing that made Halloween so good was that it was scary at the time, but it was also well made. Most horror movies up to that time, nobody gave a shit. They make them kind of scary, but they were a little wonky and wobbly. None of them felt really modern at that time. None of them felt like they were artistry, like people could go, wow, that's a really well-made movie. This is a horror movie that felt Hitchcockian in its way. It looked really good for the money that was spent on it, and it changed horror. It changed horror that we watch now. It's nothing for people to go out and make a movie for cheap amounts of money and make it look good. All of that is because that movie let people know, I might be able to make one of these. I don't know. I could probably talk a dentist into giving me $100,000 to make a movie for a tax shelter. This could happen. And that was, there was a mixture of hope, thrill, style, all of that stuff that was in that movie that just moved horror in a way, and filmmaking in a way, independent filmmaking especially, into a new era, for better or for worse.
Wow, that's definitely a very interesting answer. I'm glad you chose most influential. In fact, for future reference, it won't be you, but with other people, I might ask them what is their most influential instead of their favorite, because I know what it feels like trying to answer something like that. I'm on the opposite spectrum, but I guess it's more so due to my parents had jobs that were always keeping them out of the house before I would get home. And since I wasn't a psychopath, sometimes I wouldn't have a babysitter. So, a bored child who finishes homework on the way home has a lot of free time. And this is back when people actually watched TV, not just plugged it into the internet to watch Hulu. So I got the channel surfing, and I found Evil Dead.
Oh, yeah.
Some people, actually, I learned this later on in life, some people hate that some people even consider it a horror movie. They feel like it should just be a comedy first and horror second.
Makes no sense. No sense.
And you got to understand, though, when Evil Dead came out before I was born. So the fact that I found it already meant it was old as dirt. And I just said, wait a minute, VCRs are a thing at this point in time. So I was like, you know what? I've missed half of this movie, and I kind of sort of got a mini heart attack, but I kind of want to start it from the beginning because I want to know what the actual story was, which is a weird thing to say when you're that young. Oh, I want to finish a horror movie because I don't know what the story was. And I'm like 6 or 7. I still reach up at doorknobs. I just know I'm young. So eventually I get to the TV guide thingy, and back when you could actually get those in paper. And I was like, okay, this is when it's going to come on again. So I watched the whole thing, and I was terrified. I was in a cold sweat, which is the first time I had a cold sweat. And I also randomly thought he was saying, wow, this guy said some really funny lines. And like, good guy, bad guy, I'm the guy with the gun. And no one somehow realized that I had seen this movie, despite me randomly referencing it. I don't know how that happened.
Yeah. Well, there's a reason that comedy and horror work together well when they do. They don't always. I think, in fact, it sounds like you're talking about Evil Dead 2, Dead by Dawn, right? Because that's when Ash has the shotgun and he has the
chainsaw arm.
Yeah, Chainsaw Arm. Yeah, that's the second movie, which is really good and really amazing. I love all the Evil Dead movies because they're another transformative thing. The original Evil Dead movie is the really gross out, weird one that people didn't know what to do. It was unrated, and it rarely gets called a comedy, even though I think it's kind of funny. But the second one is this perfect blend of horror and comedy. And I think the reason is that both horror and comedy work on the element of surprise. They work together on two different levels. So comedy, you get to watch somebody do things you could never get away with. And horror lets you experience situations you would never want to be in. And I think both of those, when they work together, make a masterpiece. And I think that Evil Dead 2 Dead by Dawn is without a doubt one, because of that whole farewell to arms of the hand, and he's smashing plates on his head, and just the geyser of blood. What you get in that movie is the ballet of horror. How you use a camera so much in the form of dynamics. A lot of comedies don't have dynamic camera work. They're very much like here. Yeah. Yeah, they're very static. And this was a movie that allowed, I mean, just the very beginning, that zipping down. Yeah, and both horror and comedy are also, and action films, I'll even put action films in there, that they are huge in other countries, and they're huge in immigrant households, people who come to this country and they need to learn the language, because you can follow a comedy, you can follow a horror movie, and you can follow an action film without having to know the intricacies of the plot, understand what everybody's saying. You can get it phonetically. You can get it by what's happening on there. They're like, and that's why I think horror movies are one of the most beautiful forms of cinema. They're true cinema because they are motion pictures. They move. They're there to tell a story, and you can tell that story by image. You know, it doesn't. A book is where you read. An image is where motion pictures come in, and I think that Evil Dead 2 is just one of those great ones for that reason. So yeah, great one you got there.
Yeah, like it took me literal years to realize, oh man, I actually liked a horror movie, because my family knew I wouldn't even entertain the idea of looking at them, because Chucky messed me up, because, well, I watched Chucky when I was Chucky size. Almost all the kids I knew had a pair of overalls at some point. Some of those kids were redheads. So I would have random freakouts. I wouldn't even hate them. I would just look at them and I would play ball, and they would, and this is when you literally can't even make full sentences. Someone would be like, hey, new kid, play ball? Want to play ball? And I would just look at them and slowly walk away, because it was a redhead kid in overalls. That I feel bad about it now, but hey, you know, sometimes well, that's to you in weird ways.
Oh yeah, that's actually a perfect example of the power of monsters being metaphors. You know, I think about some of the monsters, like for me, the original Frankenstein is a metaphor for me. That Frankenstein's an innocent child whose father isn't great to him, you know, and he is angry like a child. And he makes mistakes, and his mistakes are very costly. He's considered a freak. So I always felt like Frankenstein. But Freddy Krueger and Chucky, these were angry uncles. Then the Chucky was the bully, the kid who everybody knew a kid. And I would think that, you know, depending upon who you are, a redheaded kid in overalls could send a really disturbing message of hey,
dolls on the Toys R Us. I couldn't escape them one year.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's amazing, and that's something that you know, we have this thing called the uncanny valley. The uncanny valley is like when people can't stand marionettes. Like, you love dolls when they're really not looking like a human being, but when they start getting more and more realistic, we start freaking out, because we know they're not alive, but they start looking alive. They've got like dummies for CPR now that look absolutely real and have like tongues, but they're half the body and not the second half. The lower half is not there. And it's been freaking out ambulance drivers, because they're like, this feels a little bit too close to home, you know. And so we have this thing where, on a primal level, we understand the dark side of the outsider, the dark side of the thing that wants to seem like it's a friend, but it's not a friend. The red means danger, right? So it's really cool.
Okay, well, first and foremost, before we go into this next question, because I've asked this before, and I'm going to preface this by saying there is no wrong answers, and please don't look at me to help you alter or make a decision on it. But if horror movies were to become mainstream and started heavily saturating the market, would you consider that to be a good thing or bad thing, and why?
Oh, well, it's not like it hasn't happened before. I always wonder what saturate means when somebody asks me that, because the reality is, like, people ask, why isn't horror more popular? I'm like, have you ever looked at the box office? Every year, horror movies are $1 billion industry. There's a bunch of them, but they always sell. We have this thing, though, where we like to compartmentalize horror and put it on this spot. I don't think there's anything bigger than The Walking Dead for about 8 years. People who weren't into horror at all were watching this zombie soap opera, right? And The X-Files was huge. And these things are horror. And then we have, say, all the zombie movies that came out and stuff like that. So I think saturation is usually there. But I think I understand the question in the way that I used to talk about like heavy metal or punk rock back in the day, which is like, man, I love that band until it got popular and then it sold out. And I think that that's what we really talk about when we talk about horror becoming saturated in the market. We get half-assed horror movies. We get movies that are being made by people who aren't fans. And that happens to anything that becomes a trend. What's great about things that are kind of outsider art, if you want to call it that, is that it has its moment in the stars. Like after Jaws came out, after The Exorcist came out, horror movies were everywhere because they won Oscars. They were considered true art, and those movies were easy to imitate over and over and over again. We're still Sharknado and stuff. Jaws is from 1975. Yeah, I mean, all that shit is still out there. There's Shark. There's a million shark movies, and that movie is over 40 years old, almost 50 years old, for God's sake, and it's had that kind of impact. Well, the years from 1976 until, well, Star Wars takes over, but everything was killer sharks, killer dogs, killer bears, birds, everything was killing. Nature was killing everything. So horror has been super popular. It has saturated the market, and it dies out. The people who catch it as a fad, horror fans just have to kind of sit there and endure the time that it's that super big, and then it goes away. But it's not horror's fault. That's what we do in marketing. That's what we do with anything that we love. We kill everything we love through imitation. And so science fiction movies, I'm waiting for the Marvel thing to end, because it's gotten to a point now where it's so saturated that it's almost as if we're back to being comic book kids, where you needed to invest in 10 different storylines to understand the big story. You couldn't just watch a movie. The movie wasn't just that. It wasn't a complete beginning, middle, and end for 2.5 hours. Now it's like, wow, if you have to watch Doctor Strange to understand what's happening over here. So at some point that's going to burn out, because it's gotten so big and it's gotten so immersive that sooner or later someone's going to go, what the fuck are we doing? And everybody's going to go, you know what? I've been thinking that for about a decade myself. It's time to go back to...
So many salty people once they hear that. Don't get me wrong. Like I mentioned, I do enjoy differences of opinion, but I'm glad you said it, not me. I have a slightly different position on it. I knew from the beginning, the minute Avengers made $1 billion, Disney was not going to stop. However, what does Disney always do when they have something profitable? They've got it almost down to a science. They start oversaturating the market, and when they see the ship sinking, they don't actually let it sink. They put flotation devices on the people and they spread it out, which I knew they was going to do, because here's something cool a lot of people miss out on if you only know about the movies. They started making actual genuine TV shows, and they don't have the restrictions of a PG-13 audience. And no shows are self-contained, even if they feature someone from the movie. I love those so much because you actually get character development. And that's not a bad thing for these movies. When you have an ensemble cast, they learned it, I think it was back in the 60s or 70s when ensemble cast first actually got initiated. When you have an ensemble cast, you are not going to get enough time in one movie to go through and develop or have a serious moment with every character. That's why, despite what people think and say about the original Ghostbusters, because you were there for the time, I was basically born right when it started. People couldn't decide if it was good or bad because critics couldn't stand it, but the people who watched it, they loved it. It was one of those times when everyone was conflicted and they had good points. These characters are not being developed. Bill Maher has the same emotion in every single scene. He watched his girl turn into a literal demon that was trying to take over and kill people in New York, and he just goes, oh, well. But when you look at these Marvel characters, the most characterization in it, people think I'm joking. If you stop and look about it, if you don't include movies, you include the ensemble movies, the most characterization you got is the first 30 minutes or 40 minutes of the Avengers, the one right where they lost to Galactus, Infinity War, because
Infinity Wars.
Everybody doesn't like Tony Stark because he's an asshole. Tony Stark is in the middle of getting married, and he's been told, look, you need to calm down with this superhero gallivanting because you're starting to piss off your wife. I'm sorry, fiance. You haven't even got the ring and walked down the aisle yet. Peter's still in that, oh boy, I want to help. I'm the allegory for the audience of kids who grew up watching this, essentially. That's what he was in that entire movie. The Hulk is literally having psychological trauma, and he can't be the Hulk. So he's stuck in his tiny form. So one of the biggest and strongest people literally doesn't even want to help them. Nothing happened with T'Challa, but that's okay. He was going to get his own movie. I'm okay with that. And everyone else basically knew going in that we're going to have to put aside our differences. But you only get to know that these characters had character in Civil War, where you find out, oh, they can hate each other. And the next one, Infinity War, when they are literally hating each other, even though they just met each other, or they think this guy's an idiot. No, this guy's an idiot. I love that because it broke, well, mind you, it was PG-13. It broke the mold of that concept of everybody is shoulder patting each other on the back. And in fact, I know you don't remember the line, but one of the deepest lines I've ever seen came from those ensemble movies when Bruce Banner said to Natasha, who was obviously falling in love with them, Natasha, this wife, kids, family stuff, I can't give you all that. That's not me. I'm not just me. I have to deal with the monster. I can't deal with the monster and maintain any type of like legitimate relationships. Like, well, I can't even have children. And I was like,
right.
They waited until now to give them character development, but at the same time, it worked because they had a wall or an image, I like to say, and as you know with anybody in humanity, when you have the wall and the image of the person, that's never the full picture or it's not even real. You have to go beneath the surface layer. But because we got these shows now, we can actually get beneath their surface layer. We can see people stop adhering to PG-13. The Winter Soldier is one of the most scary characters that there's ever been, not necessarily in the entire Marvel franchise, but in the movies. And I'm gonna tell you why. Because he's a cold-blooded, unfeeling assassin for 80 to 70 years of his entire life. And then he had to deal with that PTSD. He had to deal with the guilt of murdering people. And he felt like he didn't deserve to actually be loved by anyone because he was a monster in his own mind. He had nightmares and trauma about the people he murdered. He was literally, in the first episode, you learn, besides going to therapy, he was visiting the man who, of the person the son of the man he killed. And the dude was completely innocent. He just happened to watch the hit that he got told to do. And you realize suddenly in that one moment, especially if you like saw him at first when you were like 5 or 6, you realize when you become a teenager, oh snap, this guy's messed up.
That's the thing. I mean, I'm loving everything that you're saying because just because I think that the bubble's going to break on this thing, it doesn't mean that I'm not a huge fan. I mean, this is like when I was a kid, I was in Silver Comics, Silver Legacy, that age was mine. So all these stories are mine. And what was so amazing about Marvel as opposed to DC, like I was not a DC guy because DC, I could never be Superman, right? And chances are, unless it's Superman impossible, right?
He doesn't feel human, but he feels like a human ideal.
He's an ideal. And so DC Comics always felt like they were resolved easily and that they were kind of clean in a way. The Justice League.
You're quoting George R.R. Martin. Ironically, that's one of the things that made him become a writer, because he grew up and he realized one day, no matter what happens, Superman and DC Comics always have happy endings. The status quo is returned, and he hated that.
Yeah, and Marvel, on the other hand, was completely different. Marvel took place in New York City. I knew New York City. I lived 2.5 hours from it. But I understood the teenage angst. I understood the Hulk, which was this character that was the id. And it was like this crazy ego that was what a teenager feels. There was a family that was really dysfunctional in the Fantastic Four. All these guys, and Captain America was the closest thing that there was to Superman. Yeah. Yeah. And so, but you had this mix, like Captain America and Ideal is being questioned by Brooklyn guys who are giving him crap. And I always was like, wow, there's an imperfection to the world that Marvel had. So I've loved watching these. I saw the old movies that never worked, that nobody talks about, the original Fantastic Four, and I watched the Spider-Man TV. Yeah, it's believe me, you take your time on that.
I'm
It's
watching
not
it for
great.
the cringe. I'm going for the cringe.
Yeah, well, you'll be getting a lot of that. You'll enjoy it. Get some cringe shakes. I have something.
That's just how it was to me, because the way I looked at it, I saw it as, oh wait, if these start tanking, but the shows have been doing extremely well, then I kind of want the movies to not sell, but I want them to lose their hold on our pop culture conscious, because that means I get more shows because they're so
Right.
good.
Yeah, I mean, I watched.
I don't know if you've seen it, but Iron Fist was complete and total
Yeah.
trash. But season
Yeah.
2, everybody that wasn't Iron Fist was more interesting, and they realized it. So they started making the supporting cast have more interesting stories than Danny Rand did, and I loved it.
Oh, yeah.
That what is
Oh,
it?
yeah, well-
Typhoid Mary? That is one of the most boring and mundane villains that has ever existed in Marvel's library. But they took that little concept and look how they expanded her. It also helped that she has some nice legs. But the fact that they could have a character like that was literally the definition of vestigial. If she died tomorrow in the comics,
Right.
no one's writing a death threat tomorrow. And they made you feel. Same with Bullseye. Everyone hates Bullseye just because he killed the lecturer. Whoop-de-doo. They literally had Kingpin. Oh man, someone's gonna be mad about the spoilers. I'm gonna put
Kingpin was
spoilers in the title.
so-
He sat
yeah.
down and went through this entire dude's psychological profile so he could learn how to manipulate them. That's something you would have never got from that BS Daredevil movie with Ben Affleck. Because
Oh, no. Now the Daredevil show was phenomenal. Jessica Jones was phenomenal. Well, all of these ones before it really got big, and I've been watching, Loki, and I just ended up watching the Hawkeye one, and I've enjoyed those. I really liked when they were the shows, like when Daredevil was on. I wish that didn't go away. I like Luke Cage. What they did with Luke Cage was really good.
and we both might get lucky, because there's 3 shows in particular. Mind you, supposedly it's a rumor, but it's one of those, we don't want people snitching before we have anything concrete, but the Marvel Parliament, or I forget what they call them, but you'll see them in some of the credits. That's what they call themselves. There's 3 people, Kevin Feige being one of them, that basically run and decide what's going to happen in Marvel's future. And they didn't even want those shows to end, and they've actually been trying to fight to get them back. In fact, Feige's even admitted it. Everyone who's in the Netflix show, they were supposed to have shown up in that final fight sequence in the end game. But the licensing deal was going to take too long.
Yeah, I actually went to see No Way Home, and when I saw Matt Murdock appear, even in a short period, I was like,
I'm a middle-aged man, but when I got my Toby back, I cried, and like everybody else, when you saw Andrew Garfield, half the audience booed. That's okay. We love Andrew Garfield. We just hate the movies he was in.
Yeah, that's what's funny. I love how they played with that. Like, he was like, I don't have any power. I never went to space. He's like, you got to love you. You got to love you. And I thought that was just really such a wonderful in-joke.
It came out of nowhere, but everyone knew what it meant. He's basically saying, bro, I'm not a good Spider-Man. I'm going to tear Peter Parker. And here's Toby and the new guy saying, bro, you don't actually suck. The movies you were in were the problem, not your portrayal.
Right.
Andrew Garfield genuinely loves Spider-Man, and he's the luckiest out of the 3. And I know it sounds weird, given I've had a similar issue. Andrew Garfield is the one that looks the least old. Tom Holland has already started getting wrinkles, and he's about to be 30. Andrew Garfield still has no wrinkles, and he's about to be 40. Like, Andrew Garfield is not young, but that face, that $1 million face. And both of them are getting new movies. Bro, when I found out both of them were getting new movies, including Tom Holland, I was like, you know what? We got a cartoon version of Into the Spider-Verse. Let me get my live action too.
Oh, yeah. I was waiting for the Spider-Verse thing. I mean, I think they even said a little throwaway line, like, maybe somewhere there's a black Spider-Man. And I was like, oh, will it come? Will it come? Yeah.
Y'all remember that? You help out the poor. You're from Harlem, and you just go around helping the regular people. I mean, I don't know. I just kind of thought you'd be a black. Well, maybe there's a black Spider-Man out there. Because
I
don't
love
know if
this.
you caught it, but 4 years ago, they acknowledged his existence, but they didn't say it, and I caught it because I remembered something that was hilarious. One of the hilarious things about the Ultimate Universe, besides no one really gave a shit about it except for Spider-Man, they took some of the most meek and uninteresting villains and they made them more important, or they gave them more links to the heroes that they go to. The Prowler, who is played by Donald Glover in the first movie, his nephew is Miles Morales.
Right.
So when he said, wait, I got a nephew who lives in Queens or Harlem, I don't want that type of stuff in his neighborhood, so I'm going to help you snitch on the Condor. Right? I was like, Miles exists. We finally win. He better have a hot Puerto Rican mom. I'm not saying I have a South American preference, but she should be adorable at a bare minimum. But, moving into our next question before we get on a Marvel tangent. All right, so the next question is, are there any cases of written horror that you think translated well into movie or television format? And if so, can you name a few recommendations? And no, that's not a personal question for me, although I do try to look for horror TV shows because The Walking Dead woke something up in me. It didn't make me like lust for horror, but it made me interested in having a show where there is actually mortality for the main cast. Like, you don't know who's going to make it episode to episode. And I've only been able to find it in horror shows, but I don't know where any of them are.
Yeah, that and Game of Thrones. Walking Dead and Game of Thrones are the ones that have the best version of anybody can die at any time. That it enriches the storyline because horror movies essentially are always talking about how life is precious. How do we show that life is precious? Because there's a threat to it. And you can make it to the morning. So many horror movies are about just make it to dawn, man. Just make it to dawn. And that's metaphoric in and of itself. So when we see shows that take heroes and destroy them in a way, have them die, that is a sobering thing, but it's also making, it inadvertently shows us how precious life is. When horror fans cry when a favorite character dies or they're ready to, protest because of it, that is a sign of humanity. That we actually have a humane part of us, that we still care, that we can become attached. And so I think that's one of the positives that people don't usually look at. But yeah, when you talk about shows or books and movies or shows working on them, I have an entire chapter called Big Bad Books in my book, and it's about the thing that happens with books, and that's where I basically say that my first co-conspirator, that my corruptor, was a book, because I could read someone being eviscerated while I was on the bus, and no one knows. I can't watch a horror movie and start screaming and stuff. People will look at me, but when I'm reading, I could be reading anything. And so what I say in the book and what I say about this kind of thing is that it's not always the case, but a lot of times books that aren't great make great movies. They take the seed of what was really good in the book and they are able to elongate it. Or you have something where there are occasional books where the movie is nothing like the book, but the book is great and the movie is great. The Shining is one that comes to mind. The Shining movie has nothing to do with the Shining book. The Shining book, on the other hand, is really good.
See, now
and it's scary.
I get it, because I didn't actually know that, and I didn't perceive The Shining as a horror movie. Although my heart jumps a little bit when I see twins walking down the hall, but that doesn't happen.
Right.
Obviously, they're twins. But I'm gonna look for the book now.
Yeah, the book is completely different than the movie. The movie goes down an entirely different path of a ghost story. The book is more like, this is an evil place that brings evil people to it. And so it's really kind of cool in that way. The Birds, the old Alfred Hitchcock movie with the birds. The book is actually a novella. It's a shorter book, is darker, way darker than the movie. And the movie's pretty bleak. I love that movie because even though it's super old and the people are kind of fucked up, it's kind of sexist in ways, the idea is so pure. They never tell you why the birds are doing what they're doing. And it's such a weird thing. Like, why would birds be scary? But all you have to do is one day walk in a park and have all these birds fly out of a tree and you didn't know one was in there, but there were 100 birds in there. And you start to go, man, they own the sky. You know, if this did go bad, what would you do? Yeah, you could shoot at them, but there's millions of them. And that's what's scary about zombies, right? Whether they're fast-moving zombies or slow-moving zombies, it's the numbers game, right? They're going to get you. So the Shining's one. Jaws is a terrible book. It's a shitty book, but it made a really good movie. So they took the bones of the story and said, we can make something really good out of this. And so the thing that you get is a monster movie where they have the entire ocean is the place underneath your bed, right? We worry about where our legs are kicking. When we're up in the ocean, no big thing, but what's happening under the water is always something that's an anxiety point. And so that worked really well. I think Interview with a Vampire was a really good adaptation of a really good book. And so sometimes those things do work together. Haunting of Hill House, a great old story by Shirley Jackson about a bad place that attracts people, the weak and the evil. And there's a mini series on not HBO, on Netflix, The Haunting of Hill House, which is fantastic. And it has a little bit of that thing that you were talking about where you're not sure who might get off. Do you know somebody's going to get off? Yeah. And I'm trying to think of some other ones, but there's plenty of the original Pet Sematary. I hated the remake of Pet Sematary.
So often from horror people.
Yeah, it's because it takes the themes that made the book so good away. It's such a fucking, well, I don't want to get too crazy on it. I don't know if you've seen any of them, but the thing that was the most amazing bit of the original Pet Sematary, the book, was that it was the monkey's paw. Be careful of what you ask for. If you get, it could be a nightmare. And the idea of Pet Sematary is a look at a horrible man. The line that comes out of that book and out of the first movie is the heart of a man is stonier. And basically he kills his family because he wants to be free. He's resentful that his in-laws that don't think highly of him, and that they've paid while he was going through med school. They kept them afloat, and he resents them. He resents his wife. He has a daughter. He doesn't like the daughter. He resents that they have a little love between each other that he can never get to. He loves his son. What he secretly wants to do is he wants to leave his old life and just go with his son, who's so much like him, and go have fun. You know, there's no more fun in my life. And so when the son dies, he takes him to this place to have him reborn, at the idea that, you know, what you're asking and what you're doing, your intentions are going to come back to bite you. And so he causes the death of everybody because he wants to change the rules of his life. He's ultimate privilege. He's this guy who has everything going for him, and he's not satisfied, and he ruins everybody's life over it. That's the subtext of Pet Sematary, the book and the movie. And the new movie is, oh, well, you know, he's kind of put upon because he's got a harpy wife that believes in God, and he doesn't believe in God, and she's insisting everything is not his fault in the new movie. It's a bro movie. It's made for bros. No, it's not our fault. Bitches are the problem. You know, it's that. I was watching it going, you're kidding me. The cautionary tale, the story that had the courage to talk about that kind of toxic masculinity has now been cut. And so that's why I hate the new Pet Sematary. The new Pet Sematary makes it like, no, Lucas Creed is a nice guy. No, he's not. He's the problem. He's the problem with where we are right now. Everybody's saying, no, dude, it wasn't your problem. It's not your fault, man. You did the right thing. You did the right thing. It's okay to cut bait. You know, all of that shit, that's what is legitimized in that movie. And so that was American Psycho is another one where it's a great movie, shitty book. Book is so...
it was like the point where it looked like he was about to kill that homeless guy for just being homeless. And yep. I was like, and my parents saw me like not blinking. My mom just like, nope. You're gonna come back to this when you're older,
Yeah. And I think that movie is like one of the movies that I consider wonderfully dangerous. It's dangerous because people can get the wrong idea. Like Joker is wonderfully dangerous. Joker talks about some really interesting things, but it's kind of like Taxi Driver, but in the end we root for Travis Bickle instead of seeing him as, man, that's a psycho on the streets. And so there is this thing where we get a release of the anger and the rage of what's happening in society, but it happens through someone who has to be a little bit insane to be able to get away with it. And American Psycho is like that. It's an amazing satire on how we lost our souls somewhere in the riches of the 80s. And we started to think that because hippies were kind of hypocritical, that it was okay to hate, that being compassionate was a disease, and that the only cure was being out for number one and the look good. And that's what American Psycho really is a biting satire about. But in the end, you also get this thing of he realizes he's in a true hell. He can never leave this. He is the last of his victims. His lifestyle has turned him into a psycho, but a zombie. He's imprisoned. Even when he goes on a killing spree, is it a real killing spree? Yeah, life is thoroughly empty, and he's surrounded by other empty people who, because we have to keep this show on the road, we're living on a stool that only has two legs. They will force him to stay hollow and empty because it's good for everybody. As long as everybody's saying the same lie, it ain't a lie. And that's the terror of American Psycho. And I think it's brilliant. But the book, everything that was objectionable in the movie, the problem with the book is that it's one chapter of him talking about designer jeans and how great his business card looks. And the next chapter is him stabbing the eyes out of a homeless guy and killing his dog so that he can hear the dog crying, but he can't see it, right? That's the cruelty of that book. And then the next chapter is, and I had a nice milkshake, and it was really healthy, and I paid $10,000 for a hairpiece that I'll never wear. And then the next thing is, and I sodomized her while I was cutting her throat, and the blood was jetting with every thrust. And I was like, this fucking book is horrible. Why do I need to live with this? See, a scene in a movie lasts maybe a minute. Reading a chapter of that shit might take 15, 20 minutes.
Nonverbal communication on display versus reading nonverbal communication. One will always be, for lack of a better term, more efficient or able to provoke emotion.
Right.
All right. So, and this is possibly the question I was most interested in the most about having an answer. Everyone and their mom knows who Stephen King is. And if you don't, you are not from North America. But are there any horror writers and directors you think people should be looking into? And what are some of the recommendations from them and their catalog? Doesn't matter if it's film or a book.
I'm going to mix it up a little bit with those. And I think, and I also want to bring in like documentary or things about horror. So I don't know if you've seen this, but Robin Means Coleman and Tananarive Due are two writers, African-American writers, who wrote a book. One of them wrote a book about Black horror called Horror Noir, and the other teaches studies on Black horror, I think at UCLA. I had them on my podcast when their Shudder documentary came out. I highly recommend the book. I highly recommend the documentary if you haven't seen it, which basically...
get the name from you later once this is over, because I do want to see it.
Oh, it's fantastic. Basically, they start it by saying... the Black community has always loved horror movies, but horror movies have not always loved us. And it opened my eyes to several things that I didn't really notice. One of which was how Black characters were in horror movies in the 30s and 40s. They didn't have great roles, but they were in there. But they went invisible. They weren't in horror movies at all in the 50s. And that was because horror movies went after World War II. They started going to science gone out of control. So the main characters wore white lab coats and were scientists. And the mindset of the writers and directors in Hollywood at that time were, well, there are no black scientists. So they never even thought of it. And it was like by occupation, there was erasure. And so it's a really, really, really good documentary. And it puts a frame of thought into movies that I've loved for a long time and made me look at them again. And that brings me to some movies that might be of interest to you. Ganja and Hess, which I don't know if you've heard of. It's from the 70s, and it's a movie about vampirism. It's basically about someone who's black who makes money, moves into a neighborhood, and he starts to lose his soul. Starts to lose who he was to be able to assimilate into this new culture that he's in.
Literally, but they use people like that, and they're all assholes.
Yeah. And so that's Ganja and Hess is a really interesting horror movie. And it talks about how we lose ourselves to money, how we assimilate ourselves into a culture just because. And it also talks about Candyman and saying Candyman's interesting, but he's also very problematic. Why in the fuck is Candyman, if he's for Cabrini Green, he's a boogeyman for the black people? Why isn't he attacking the white people? why is he attacking people in the slums? That doesn't make any sense. And yeah. And so there's this whole thing that they talk about where the new Candyman makes sense, which is if he is this slave who
original actor too.
Yeah. I love the new Candyman because it did something that I've always, when I'm asked what scares me, which is always another problematic story.
I always say, because it usually just turns into literally like something that you're allergic to, not what scary thing you like in a book or movie. Plus that usually gets answered throughout the course of an interview anyway.
Yeah, and so scary, the scariest kind of horror movies to me are ghost stories and possession movies. Possession movies because of my past. It's still somewhere deep down, even though, I don't believe like I used to believe anything like that, there's still a part of me that has not been erased that says, what if they're right? And demon movies scare me. Ghost stories are scary for the first 2 acts. And then it's like small claims court of the supernatural. All of a sudden, it turns into this story of, well, what I've been haunting you about is that you're a third party that has to. I have a dispute with another party. They're not answering me. They've taken something of mine, and I need someone to be my lawyer. So I'm haunting you, so you bring that person in. It's like small claims court, and it becomes nothing.
That is the most interesting comparison I've ever heard in my life. Thank you for that.
And so, that thing is, what kills those movies is that the last act is all we need to do is get the bones back in the grave, or he has the secret key, or whatever it is. The being's going to go back to rest. Yeah, the being's going to go. It's a supernatural being that has somehow found its way into our plane and can alter ourselves, our lives, and haunt people who heard it. Why would it ever go back in the bottle? I would never leave the bottle. I'd be like, fuck you. Thanks for the bones. But you know what I'm going to do? There's a bunch of people on my shit list. There's going to be some reckoning. So if you're sitting there and you're going to be Candyman and you're a ghost, it's like, fuck you. This entire city fucked me. I am taking it down. And that's where that movie starts at the end. I was like, holy shit, they're doing it. They're going to have a ghost story that doesn't end with all of a sudden the party that got destroyed by ugly, horrible people is the one that has to be the most forgiving, right? It's got to be the sacred, what's that called? I can't remember what it's called. It's the idea that, the underprivileged and stuff, they just have to be a little bit nicer and everybody can get along. They have to forgive us for the terrible things that we did, like we murdered everybody. At least he forgives us.
That no one actually wants to do.
Yeah. And it's like, why wouldn't this thing of rage that came into our world, why would it suddenly be okay? It wouldn't. And that's what I loved about the rage will end when the rage ends. There's injustice to be knocked down, man. And so that's why I loved where Candyman went. And with demon movies, it's kind of the same thing. The demon movies, to me, they're scary for the first 2 acts because it's all about being the prey. It's all about the hunt. Something's happening to me. Things are happening. I'm terrified and no one believes me. It's in me. What the hell? But once they find out that it's a demon possessing somebody, it's like finding out they have mono. It's like, well, you have a demon. We're gonna call two guys over, and they're gonna say a bunch of things, and we're gonna shit it out of you. And the movie goes from being a scary haunted house inside of a few person's body to a movie the size of either a bed or a chair. They're either tying the person to a bed or they're tying him to a chair. And the movie is boop like that. And it's because The Exorcist was so influential that no one knows how to end these things. The scary thing is the demon doesn't leave you, and you're going to be tortured forever. That's the horror movie that's not being made, and I think it has to be made. Anyway, I digress. There's so many answers for here. So that Horror Noir is one. Another really good writer is Stephen Graham Jones. He's Native American, and he has two books, The Only Good Indian and My Heart is a Chainsaw, that were national bestsellers. He's done several others. Those are the two that I read. And what I like about him is that it's all metaphor. It's all allegory, but it's not all about the suffering of reservation Indians on the surface of the story. You get that through the color of the story, the way people live, the way that they think of themselves, the way they're not believed, the way of suicide, the way of alcoholism. All of that stuff is the setting, not the monster. And that has so much power.
You would enjoy Reservation Dogs, but I'm not.
I do.
I can skip it then. But yeah, go ahead, continue.
Yeah, Reservation Dogs is. I've only watched the first episode so far, and I'm like, whoa, I got to come back to this.
Nothing then, but let me tell you,
it's
a comedy, but it's a comedy based in reality. I've had friends not realize that, oh no, they're not joking. These things actually are happening on the soil. But yeah, I won't ruin it for you, but continue. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that's, to me, that is the proper use of the metaphor and allegory that horror allows us. I have no problems with Bucket of Blood movies. You can show me whatever and I'm not going to say that I don't like them. I'm an equal opportunity scare guy. But the thing that I love is when I watch horror do what it's great at, which is speak about us. And it is the critical eye. It's the music people don't want to hear. And that's why horror gets put in that redheaded stepchild thing, that it's not taken seriously, that it's denigrated, that it's considered lowbrow, because it doesn't blow smoke up your ass. I think that even the horror movie that sucks, like the movies that were in Drive and stuff, they tell us more about our culture than the high-minded ones. Because those movies need to know what makes us mad. They need to know what's driving us crazy. They need to know what our anxieties are at any given time. If you go back to the 70s, there were all these demon movies, and all it was kids cursing at their parents, which just at that time happened to be what was happening at colleges and stuff. We had the Vietnam War, and all of a sudden the teenagers, the kids, hated the parents, and the structure was falling apart. You had the church is falling apart. The church no longer has its influence. Oh, now we've got demons.
Oh, no,
you had the Roe versus Wade happening.
That has a biased opinion lost power. That's so terrible in some place.
Yeah, I know.
Alternate dimension somewhere.
I'm amazed that demon movies still have any impact, because in a more secular world, when I was growing up, the church owned so much. It owned people's thoughts. People were afraid to say certain things. And that's not the way it is now. It's used as comedy routines. Church.
I'm saying that as someone who has a respect for the idea of religion and someone who is not religious. Catholicism gets in trouble in the modern era too much, and also the internet exists. The internet is the best and worst thing to happen to organized religion. You can spread your message and people can beat you over the head with the truth at the same time. You can't escape it. As long as you have messed up, someone can bring it up. Yeah.
And I think, continuing on books, William Peter Blatty, the guy The Exorcist, he was studying to be a Jesuit, and then he came up with one of the most evil, a great look at the nature of evil, The Exorcist. That book and that movie are really, really good. They're really strong and powerful. The movie's slow, by today's standards. But when it kicks in, I remember seeing it in like the early 2000s. It came back into the theaters, and I'm watching it with an audience, and most of the audience is younger at that point. And I'm watching, I'm going, wow, this movie does drag. You know, the beginning is really slow, and then comes the first time that the little girl really beats up her mom and attacks a psychiatrist, and everybody's screaming, and it cuts. And someone in the audience goes, holy fuck. And I was like, yeah, this movie still, when it hits with serious power.
Okay. That is definitely, man, you've given me so many things. I'm typing half the stuff as you say, because I'm going to look at some of this later. All right. But going into our penultimate question, which this is the first, okay. This was going to be the first question, but I literally moved it down because I thought, man, that's going to be an interesting one. Should gorenography be considered its own genre, or do you feel as if it's not worthy of separation from horror?
Well, I don't know if worthy has anything to do with it. I'm a firm believer that labels should only be on medicine, poisons. Like if you take it, you could die. I have I have an entire show that I do called My Horror Manifesto. And it's basically talking about why is it so hard to say horror? Why are there so many movies that steal horror ideas, are horror movies, but once they get to Oscar time, they're suddenly turned into thrillers like Jaws and like Silence of the Lambs, and even movies that don't seem initially like horror movies, and you really look at them like No Country for Old Men. These are horror movies that turn themselves, because once they get prestige, the word horror is a dirty word.
Yeah, I hate that. And so I know about the book a little bit. I didn't get to finish it, but the movie No Country for Old Men, for me, like, I didn't know that it wasn't considered a horror movie, because what happens in it? There's an assassin trying to murder people, and he's also a genuine, he has a psychological defect.
Yeah, he is unstoppable. He is fate. What do we have? Anytime someone goes outside of the lines, this specter appears who can't be killed. Sugar. And he's everywhere. He's perfect as an assassin. He has no empathy. He is plain. He is dressed so that he can blend in with everybody, and yet he's a monster.
Books, I don't know if you read it or not, but did you read the book?
No, I didn't read the book.
Well, there's not much to spoil, but he's scarier in the book because Anton Sugar was the everyman, but in the most boring sense. He was a blonde, blue-eyed man who had no features that were too pretty, no features that were too ugly. He could literally walk in a crowd of hundreds of people who looked at him and they couldn't remember his face. That scared me more than the actual person that they chose to play him, because if I saw him walking down the street, I was like, man, that's a scary guy. I'm not going to fuck with him. But if I saw Anton Sugar in the book, he could kill me immediately, because I would walk past him not thinking that he's even out for blood, and boom, next thing you know, my corpse is on the ground.
Oh, yeah. Now, the book that, so Cormac McCarthy wrote No Country for Old Men. He also wrote Blood Meridian, which is a Western horror movie. But nobody's been ever able to make it because it's so violent that no one has been able to figure out, how do we make this movie work? How could we make this book work, this movie?
So many things after this. I didn't know that there was a Western horror movie, and I'm not saying that hyperbolically. I'm being literal. I didn't know anybody mixed the two.
Yeah, it's a horror novel, but there are Western horror movies, and I'm drawing a blank right now, but I will come up with a few by the time this is over, because the idea of the death of the Old West, the old cowboy and Indian idea, was a ghost story horror movie allegory. You know, the idea of the other. You can't get much more horror than these things. The Wind is a really good Western horror movie. Eyes of Fire is another one where they take the metaphor of colonialism, right? You're colonizing this place. You're killing everything that you're going to. And the nature starts to come after the people. The spirits of the natives start coming after the people. It's pretty good stuff. But anyway, Cormac McCarthy writes amazing horror novels that win awards. And Blood Meridian is one. The Road, which was turned into a movie, which is an apocalyptic thing with a sun and that's, cannibals walking the earth and all of this stuff. That's all that's left. Cormac has a dark presence. And he's one of the people that I would put as what you asked before about novelists. But anyway, I don't want to go too far off the thing. I'm not sure if I know what gorenography is, because I don't really
it's the belief that any horror movie that profusely and obsessively shows and is dictated to have body horror and the showing of internal organs to the actual camera and on the screen is in and of itself, quote unquote, gorenography. It's literally horror that is predicated on abuse and almost oversaturation of showing the human body mutilated as well as the organ.
Right. So we used to call that splatter back in the day. There were splatter films and there were slasher films. Slasher films were more knifey. Yeah, but gorenography, that sounds like an opinion, is what it sounds like. It sounds like calling something pornography, which was kind of one of the things that happened with pornography. There was an old Chief Justice of the Supreme Court who said, "I know it when I see it," which means it's thoroughly subjective. And I think that horror is thoroughly subjective. What scares you may not scare me. What scares me might put someone else into a coma. And that is the great thing about it as well, is that it is truly something that we can maybe not agree on what we like, but we can understand each other and share how these things affect us. And so it sounds like it is a subgenre of its own, I guess, gorenography, but it sounds like that's somebody who's not a horror fan defining what they dislike about horror. What I find is that when I talk to people about horror, if I'm talking to someone who's a fan of horror movies, I'll talk to them for about 20 minutes. If I'm talking to someone who doesn't like horror movies, we talk about 20 minutes. And that's because everybody has an opinion and it's very, very passionate about it. There's something personal. There's something vulnerable about horror that talks about a part of us that sometimes we're not very pleased about. And I find that people who are not horror fans tend to define the entire genre, which has so many umbrellas, by the movie that they hate. They saw something that disgusted them. Yeah, it's a blanket statement. So I'm not a fan of gorenography just from hearing it, because it sounds like pornography, which means that it's denigrating it. It's also saying that pornography is somehow a denigrating thing. I think there are pornographic films that are I can't think of a good word. Don't want to use evil because that's so Old Testament. But I think that there is a place for erotica. And I think there is a place for horror. But there are also versions of those that are reprehensible. There are horror movies I wish I never saw. Yeah, depravity. So there is depravity in these things. There's depravity in dramas. Welcome to Birth of a Nation. There can be movies that are prestige films that show a terrible mindset of a time, that when we watch them 30 years later, we go, holy shit, we should hold our heads in shame that we ever thought these things.
Context is key.
All that stuff, right? All that stuff. There is no genre that is blameless. There are comedies that you can't look at anymore. Animal House is considered super rapey. Revenge of the Nerds is super rapey. You know, these are things. Yeah, they are. And yet, at the time, you know, people, that was how we thought. It doesn't mean it was ever right, but that was how people thought. We look at it now and we go, wow, we owe some people an apology. But what I'm getting at is that there is depravity that can be found, which is when we look, for me, my definition of something that's depraved is when we are emotionlessly destroying somebody. And that is where we assume that they have no human emotions. The idea of what Nazis say about mongrels, the idea that animals don't have souls, right? All of that stuff that you hear.
Lack of empathy.
We kill what we have no empathy for. It's easy to kill comic book characters, not human beings. So that's that's what I call depravity. So if you have a movie, and there are movies like this, there are horror movies where it's just somebody tied to a chair and they're cutting pieces off of them, and it's all for the special effect. Gore freaks, gore hounds. That does happen. Yeah. But my issue is, the question is never really about those. The question is, Why are there horror movies? Why don't we consider horror movies lower life forms, lower entertainment, the lowest common denominator? It's really a denigration of how could you watch those things? You know, and that's what I always say. Why can't we just say horror? And why I dislike labels like post horror. I don't understand what post horror is. What horror post horror is
and the internet caught on to it. It happens a lot, unfortunately.
Yeah, I know. I don't like horror movies, but I like this movie, so it's not a horror movie. Why? Because I don't like horror movies. But the reality is they don't like horror movie fans. They don't like the people who watch these kind of things. They think that there's something really wrong with us. And so I'm not a fan of labels. I wish they would all be taken away because I think horror deserves its place at the table, just like everything else. And I think that when we use labels never are inclusive. It's always a velvet rope you have to walk around. It's a velvet rope that gets put in front of you and says, no, you can't come in here. It's like well, I don't know. I don't want to offend anybody in your audience, but it's like the Gamergate, right? Gamergate.
Yeah, they started off so right, and then they screwed up so quickly.
Right. So you have all of that stuff where it becomes about you being the new gatekeeper, right? I hate gatekeepers. I am a fan, and my fandom, what I believe is a fan, isn't a hoarder who has information, who has things and uses that as a power. I totally share.
Agree. That should be shared.
My thing is sharing.
That's how you grow a healthy fan base. You don't take and leave somebody with scraps. But
yeah,
I'm also
that's how you have fans.
Exactly. And I'm also partially conflicted, not because I've done it in the past. I've always thought it was dumb, but because unfortunately, because of and this is sometimes when empathy comes back to bite me in the ass, I actually asked a gatekeeper, quote unquote, what exactly is the concept of a gatekeeper by their nature for any fandom? What do you do? And unfortunately, he couldn't say it in 30 seconds like I can. He took him an hour and a half. But essentially, it boiled down to, I want to stop the degradation and erosion of the imagery, as in how people view this fandom, from going someplace negative or reaching into depravity and degradation. Or alternatively, I'm the person who wants to make sure a bare minimum level of quality can be maintained, because if anything just comes in, it can easily be diluted and turned into trash, not by my opinion, but to the point where the fan base can't even maintain itself because people are losing interest because trash is flooded. And I was like, okay, I understand what you mean now, but I don't think shitting on people on the internet is going to help that.
Not only that, anytime anybody talks about purity, I'm walking the other direction.
Because that is so easy to slip into something so wrong when you start saying purity.
Well, it's not even slipping into something wrong. It's wrong. I mean, he's wrong. Who the fuck is the gatekeeper to tell you at any point in time that this is what fandom is, this is what the art is? That art that he is trying to defend at one point, it doesn't even own, but it was considered trash before him. And now he's doing the same damn thing. And that's what drives me crazy about gatekeepers. Gatekeepers want their opinion to stay. They forget that art and culture and society is a constantly flowing thing. We don't necessarily always like what goes on, but we also kept people out. You know, it looks like it does because we kept people out. It's like when I have friends who go, anybody should be able to act. You know, it's called acting. You know, people are getting mad because this person's going to play someone of a different ethnic background. That's such bullshit. That's acting. Do you know that the reason that you have white people acting as these different ethnic things is that they would not allow ethnic people to be in these movies? All we had were white people. So that became the standard. And that became a lie was, oh, look what a great actor he is. He can play paralyzed. He can play these other folks, they don't get to be actors. They get to be in the audience. They get to enjoy it. So it's all based on bullshit. It's based on the idea that for a long time, just fucking guys that were in basements, hate to say it, I hate to sound rude, and that's a denigration, so let me back that up.
Everyone's the guy from The Simpsons whose name I can't remember, but the guy who was basically a nerd and was like the embodiment of that stereotype. I totally get what you mean, because I've had to deal with these people on almost every single spectrum as someone who just enjoys media and also in particular video games. I don't live in my parents' basement. I don't live with my parents. I know how to socialize. I enjoy going outside. In fact, it's never going to come up in conversation possibly ever in my entire life, but I'm in like Google's top 20 or 10% of people that review restaurants and just public areas.
Beautiful.
But it's because I like these things that I can also enjoy video games. But for some reason, because TV told them, because a marketing department decided, or some journalist who's never touched a video game controller in his life decided, hey, this stuff is destroying your kids. There has been generations of my family that's had to deal with stigma that we didn't even cause. Because an idiot decided that, oh, we have to gatekeep video games from pop culture or popular media or just being able to promote itself online. And I'm just like, who the fuck woke up and made you guys a judge, jury, and executioner?
Absolutely. And that's the same thing. It always upsets me. You know, when I was young and it was heavy metal, Dungeons and Dragons and punk rock, that were the things that were like, yeah, oh man, you were in trouble on those. But what always bothered me is that if we all just got together, if the D&D guys got together, the heavy metal guys got together, the punk guys, there'd be more of us than there were the people who hate this. But we never get together because we become the gatekeepers. That it's like we make it past the gatekeepers to create our culture, our society, our little group. And then we become gatekeepers to keep everything else out, which is exactly how we got in our position to have to go where we were. It saddens me that we always disappoint ourselves. We're never the strong enough group to stop from going down that path of gatekeeping. And it bothers me because it's so fake. Once again, it's fake. And the reason that it's fake is that it's built on bullshit lies. It's built on stuff where girls weren't allowed, people of color weren't allowed. All this stuff happened. And then there was a break in it. And at first it was ugly, and then it got okay. And then, oh my goodness, now there's more girls coming into this. There's more women coming into this. And it's like I hear that in horror all the time. It's that old thing, right? So a woman wears a heavy metal shirt and somebody says, name 5 albums. Like that's
I've actually known someone that happened to. Oh man, that did not end well for that guy. Like he straight up did that in public. I didn't even understood what happened until 2 years later.
Yeah, it's like that stuff is just so condescending and so angering, and it's really aggressive. It's super aggressive. It's saying you don't belong here. This is where all the misfits come. We're the misfits. We're the outlaws. We're the independents. We're not like them. We're not like the mainstream. No girls allowed. What horseshit. But what the problem is that as more people who are not allowed to come in, they bring their culture. They bring their melting pot ideas to what was there. And all of a sudden it's like, wait, this can't change. Yes, it can. Yes, it can. Of course it can change. You were part of the change. The wave continues. At my age, I've learned that I'm just the janitor now. What I want to do is just clean up with everybody.
I promise you right now, and I'm saying this just as someone who has, well, I've seen a lot of eras of 19th century human beings because, although it's not advertised, and even my own recruiter back in the day had to call me to make sure it wasn't an error. My dad was actually born in the 20s. And because he looked so young, eventually he married my mom, who was born right when schools were becoming desegregated. And here I am literally being like an elder millennial. So I have one of the most unique perspectives of 19th century North America, at least according to my one of my old sociology teachers. And it's a case-by-case basis. Humanity is the definition of a case-by-case basis. Because I know from the time I was 5, someone can be raised by genuine hate mongers and grow up and be the exact opposite.
Purity, again, purity. It's all about keeping things pure. I talk about that about horror. So I talk about how horror is like Frank's red hot sauce. It goes on everything. It makes everything accentuated a little bit more. You can make a horror comedy. You can make a horror musical. You can make a horror Western. It adds. And I talk about how, to me, I don't like sequels, because sequels are kind of like inbreeding. It's the same thing. It's a purity, purebred, again and again. And if you have a dog that's purebred, they have hip dysplasia, they get all sorts of problems. It's pure, you know exactly what you're going to get. There are no surprises with those dogs, but they're sick. In the long run, you're killing the gene pool. But then there's hybrid vigor, which is when you get mutts. And horror is the perfect, magnificent mutt. I really have a problem with purity. And I think empathy is one of those things. You mentioned something very interesting, because I grew up in a ultra conservative area, a very white area. I was in the coal mine areas of Pennsylvania. And empathy came to me by failing. I think that empathy grows in people who understand the pain of failure, the pain of being an outsider, the pain of being betrayed, all of those pain, the pain of almost like having an entire culture, or not culture, but like industry. You know, everybody was the same where I grew up. And I wasn't. I was just different. I was fucked up. I was weird. I didn't follow what everybody else was doing. For some reason, I didn't want to be that way. I just was that way. And so I got kicked a lot. I got told by my own family that I was, without calling me a traitor, saying I was a traitor, that I didn't believe these things.
Now, I've experienced that so much because, well, I'll probably give you a picture of myself later, but my father is a Creole, and just based on when he was born, he is literally one of the first 19th century Creoles. My mother is an African Irish Cherokee, but she looks nothing but African. Literally, if they kept having children, like my siblings could look anything from super pale all the way down to the darkest of charcoal. But because I am the way I am, there's this automatic assumption that I am just double A, aka African American, or that I am only going to identify as, I'm like,
right.
I know what I am. And first off, I didn't hate my father. So when you tell me that other stuff don't matter, you're literally looking me dead in the face and you're telling me my father doesn't matter. You're looking me dead in the face and telling me, oh, well, the reason you're so good at what you are has nothing to do with your father. I'm sorry. First off, the man raised me. He loved me, and I was his last son. And he didn't even think he was going to have any more children because his last wife did him so greasy. So when he got to my mom decades later, he just thought, okay, I'm happy. I found someone I like. If I have a kid, I have a kid. And to top it off, he only had 2 boys of the 9 children. Our nicknames growing up were the Bookend Brothers. He had, his first child was a boy, and the very, 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 very last one, me, was also a boy. So my own mom even makes this joke about me and him being Bookend Brothers.
All right. It's really, it's just fucked up. There's just no quick answer, and there's no perfect answer on it. Yeah. Yeah. But I do believe of empathy. I do believe that empathy is grown out of realizing that the world doesn't work your way all the time, and you find a kindness. Yeah, you can either become a hater or you become someone who's empathic. And I've seen it with some of my conservative family, that they don't believe in something until it affects them. Once it affects them, man, they're like liberals. They'll go all out on it. And it's like, you didn't believe in it just 2 weeks ago. And so I do believe that there is this truth to the fact that we get our compassion through our own struggle, through our pain. We learn to empathize. And so anyway, I'm taking us off. You're going to have a hell of a time editing this one, my friend. This is
luckily, because, well, things are structured the way they are. There's essentially going to be 2 versions. There's going to be the full version, which that's going to be the one I recommend people the most. And then there's going to be the clear cut, here's you answering the questions, maybe ragging on Marvel a little bit, and then go through that way. Because I've made it clear with everybody who comes through here or who works with me on this, I don't give a shit about YouTube's algorithm. I'm not here chasing money. I'm here to talk to interesting people. I'm here to have fun with my friends, and we're here to just feel like human beings in a world where we've basically had to spend almost 2.5 years randomly being inside and not being able to do the things we used to do. Because even when this is over in Chicago, I've looked at it. We've had a lot of businesses, not just small ones, closed down. We've had landmark entertainment places closed down. So for me, this is just a way of preserving a special bubble in life. because
Yeah.
I don't think we're not going to learn from this. There are people who want to benefit from it, ignorance obviously, but I think this is going to be stuff that echoes into the future next time there's some other crisis, or we get a bunch of anti-vax or delusional people who don't understand. Just because you don't want to get vaccinated doesn't mean that you're smart.
Yeah. Oh, it's crazy. One of the things that sucks, and you'll be there, my friend, is that the older that you get, the more times this stuff replays. You see the same fucking dog and pony show done over and over with a different face. And it's just been stunning watching. I mean, it gets worse every time. We get closer to the drain every time. But I'm just like, wow, this is what freedom is now. Wow.
Yeah,
You've got to be kidding me.
And because my dad was the way he was, he saw all of it. Like, and he actually, ironically, I was extremely pessimistic about stuff. I wasn't the guy who would shit on you back in the day. I was the guy that said, well, fuck it, there's nothing I can do. And one day my dad reminded me, he's like, boy, his favorite word when he's annoyed with me. It's never my name. It's just boy. Boy.
Right.
How old am I? That's actually a good question. I don't know. Stop being a smartass. Listen, I know for a fact it takes a long time and it takes a lot of fighting, and sometimes people will win, people will lose. But it is different. Have you ever in your life seen a sign that said whites only? No. Okay then. Do you know why that is? Yeah, because laws change. Laws change because people changed.
It's amazing when you watch it change, and the change happens. Like all of this stuff where people are fighting so hard and so angry, and there's so much rage over sex, sexuality, identity, all of this stuff, or even immigration and all of these things. People are fighting it so hard. It's changing. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. We start to progress whether we want to or not, or whether everybody wants to or not. I always look at like gay marriage. When gay marriage was before gay marriage passed, people were like, they're going to kill people over it. It's going to be the end of marriage and stuff. Yeah. And then as soon as it passed, it's not talked about again. It's the fight, the last struggle, the dying lion, whatever you want to call it, the fight. But then when it passes, it's like, it's nothing. It means nothing. It was all ephemera. Oh, dear. Thank you. But yeah, I guess my segue on that would be that, when you had this whole thing of gay marriage and people were so angry it was going to be the end of the world, and then it didn't happen, the world didn't end, is indicative of what horror movies teach us as well, which is the monster seems impossible to kill. There may never be sunlight again. We'll never make it to the dawn, but invariably we do. And many times we find out the monster wasn't what we thought the monster was. Monster's not nearly as dangerous as we thought it was. The fear of the monster makes for some of the most dangerous stuff. Yeah, fear of the unknown is the thing that's the most dangerous and devastating thing that we've got. And I think horror movies are very good cautionary tales about that.
You definitely. I don't know if you or how your booking agent handles travel, especially given the world has cooties right now, but if you ever get a chance to go to C2E2, I'm pretty sure you can get panels. Moving into our ultimate topic, do you think the lack of interest for the average moviegoer not wanting to see this genre, as in horror, may be due to lack of supposed A-list talent being booked in these films, or just because they don't like the idea of being scared?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it's one of the things that I love to say is that horror is much more popular than people like to say it is. All you have to do is look at Box Office Mojo and take a look at what the highest grossest films are, and in any year, horror movies. In fact, during this pandemic, you mentioned the last 2.5 years, it's now very well documented that horror movies have saved cinema. Horror movies are what people have been going to see. I think it depends on the people that you're talking to, whether or not they're going to like seeing a horror movie or not. They might go see a horror movie with a star in it. They might be seeing horror movies that have stars in them already. If they watch the Alien franchise, or they're already watching. But the thing that horror movies tend to do, because most of them are cheap, right? It's the way that people get into the business. It's a way that you can express yourself and get a large market. Yeah. Yeah, the average budget isn't bad, but it's not great. Most people are found in horror films. What might be interesting to do is to go back and see how many A-listers started in horror movies. Almost all of them. Tom Hanks was in a horror movie. Matthew McConaughey was in a horror movie. Just about Clint Eastwood was in a horror movie. Jack Nicholson was in horror movies.
Chris Evans is, for lack of a better term, he is not his character, but if there ever was a personality he got close to matching Captain America. Because if you look at his Twitter, his Twitter is like 90%, look, I don't hate you because you're Republican, but there are some mistakes being made. I don't hate you because you're Democrat, but there are some mistakes being made. However, Trump is a fucking racist, and he just like, he's embodying his own character on accident. This man wrote a screenplay for a horror movie that actually got, released. I think it was House on Haunted Hill or something like that. And I was like, this is the last person I would ever think even cared about horror.
Yeah, comedians write horror movies. There's a very big audience between comedians and horror films. My podcast gets followed by a lot of comedy writers as well as horror writers because they obsess about this stuff. They love it, and they end up being uber fans, or they write their own stuff. But I think that you find that people find Jamie Lee Curtis, her whole career started with Halloween. Many of the A-listers of past and present work in horror at some point. They may not be proud of it. They may take it off of their thing, but it gets found out. And I think that's because horror movies not only are easily accessible, they're made very quickly. It's a way to get your foot in the door. But also, I mean, Jamie Lee Curtis had a very interesting thing to say about her role in Halloween, which was, for most of her career, that was the best character she ever played. The character was resourceful. Character was intelligent. Character stood for herself. She cared for others. She was able to speak with long lines of dialogue. She was able to hold scenes together on her own. She was top billed. She said all of these things. I needed to go from emotions of pretending that I didn't see the monster to being terrified to being someone who cares more about the kids than me. All of that stuff, I'm getting an acting workout. And there are many actors and actresses from theater that go into horror films, and they get a huge workout because there's a lot that can be done if you want to do it, and if the director is ready for you to be able to do it. So there's something to be said that horror movies aren't where people go and just do dumb things. There are movies that are like that. I'm not going to say that there's not. But I also will say that there are dramas and movies that are romantic comedies that say even less about the human condition than some of the worst horror movies. So it's not endemic to the horror film. But I'm not sure if big names, of course, they'll always draw on whatever they do. That might get more people to watch, but more people are watching horror movies than they admit. You know, it's almost like porn. People, I've seen that with like cinema friends of mine who are like, they know every movie made that was a foreign film from 2000 to 2020, and they have Directors Guild or Writers Guild cards and all this stuff. And then you go to their place and there's a horror movie and they're like trying to hide it like it's a dirty book. Oh, well, yeah, I was watching it. I really liked it. And I'm like, dude, there's nothing wrong. You're watching horror movies. They are art. They are entertainment. That's the problem
with stigmas. That is one of the biggest issues of any form of stigmatized media. And again, I mean, that's not just coming from previously being just a video game or perceived as a video game podcast. We rebranded this year, not because, we think it's cool, but because I never mentioned to you, but the main reason we rebranded, and you just happened to come in at the right time, was because we were getting too many no's, not because they weren't interested in talking to me or they didn't like the podcast. In fact, it was kind of weird, but there was a lot of people like, hey, I love your life stories. I was like, bro, that's not even the main purpose of this podcast, but hey, if it pulls you in, I'm happy for you. They were telling me, it's like, oh, well, we don't mess around with gaming. I was like, well, it literally says it in most of our documentation. We don't just discuss video games. We've never just discussed video games. We've discussed pop culture, the good and the bad about it, and we make sure it's not an echo chamber of, hey, we all like this one thing. Yeah, let's talk about this one thing all week, because that would make me go insane, even if I like it. And they would just still say no. So we just like, okay, you know what? Let's fuck the bullshit. Let's just be token podcast and call it a day. And then literally the second day we made that decision, one of your agents or managers hit us up. I forgot which one. So I was like, okay, this is the right direction.
Yeah. See, this is the thing that I think is important. I do horror, right? But if you listen to my show, I use horror to talk about what's going on in the world, or I bring art films into the horror realm as well, because I believe that if I truly think that horror is a great art form, it should be able to stand toe to toe with other art forms. And so I don't pretend that the world of drama and Academy Award-winning films don't exist. I don't live in that vacuum. But what people respond to is not that I know a lot about horror movies. It's that it's personable. I don't hide myself from the stuff. I don't hide other people I don't hide the culture from the talk about horror films. I will use 4 or 5 horror movies to create an essay about something that's going on. I've done one about misogyny. I did do one about Uncanny Valley that I talked about before. I've talked about politics in some way. I've talked about fascism in some ways by using horror movies as examples. And I've also remembered to put myself in there, because what I found out, and I found this out from going to conventions and stuff, people don't really go to conventions and just go to panels because the panel sounds interesting. They follow the people who are doing the panels. They find you interesting. They will find you out. They will look for you the next time through. And what that means is that you are what's important to your podcast. You're the ingredient no one else has. That personal passion, what I've been hearing in this conversation is so much more than what my expectations were when I read the list of questions that you asked me. I was like, okay, this sounds fine. But getting in here, I find the personality is what's important. I respond to passion. What makes me go is I find the like-minded people. Who are like-minded people? People who are passionate. I love people who can't just be bystanders. They can't just passively watch a Marvel film. They have to go out and cosplay afterwards. They have to talk about it. They have to make their own comic book. They are compelled. Yeah, they are compelled by passion to do more. Their love for the gift that they were given is to give gift in return. And that's where I'm not a hoarder. I am someone who I'm no good if I'm not telling people what movies they should be watching, or ask them what's going on with them, or getting into long conversations that go all night at conventions about what we love about whatever it is that gets us going.
Oh, I'm glad you said that, because I know I'm not the only one.
Right. Yeah. It's really intriguing. One of the something that I do is I talk about movies in a way that also is somewhat a parable of how I deal with life. And one of the things that I talk about is that older fans have an onus, a responsibility to keep up with the fucking times. The times don't have the responsibility to keep up with how things used to be. Yeah, so it's this thing of like, if being like some of my favorite people who are comics, some of them are driving me crazy right now because they're so worried about cancel culture. And it's like, there's always a time when you couldn't tell certain jokes. That's always been. It's not fucking new, dude. But you're making it sound like canceling actually kills you, which it doesn't. Your act is a commodity like anything else. If I don't like Big Macs, I don't eat them. If I eat a Big Mac and it sucks, I don't eat a Big Mac again. I'll go have a Whopper or something. But people are not forced to endure your comedy as a rightful thing. And the problem is that it used to be okay. So I talk about that in the way of horror films, which is, if people don't understand The Exorcist is a great film like it was when I was a kid, that's because the world is more secular now. The times have changed. The importance of the church has changed. There is more freedom around religion, religious expression than there used to be. So you could be something outside of the majority idea. Pacing has changed. Technology has changed. So if a young person does not understand the importance of The Exorcist, or they're not scared by it, it's not their fault. It is no longer contextually important to society at that fashion. If, on the other hand, you refuse to like a new movie because it does not conform to what you used to love in The Exorcist, the fault is yours. It's nobody's problem but yours. You are not keeping up with what is happening out here. And that is not fandom. That's, once again, being a collector. You collect the old things, and that's great. I have my preferences. I have movies that I love, but I'm always trying to stay open to what's happening now, because I don't want to be a relic, and I don't want to be that person who grumbles about how I used to have a good old, you used to be able to call people these names and nobody would get mad. What a stupid, hollow thing to say.
They would always be mad. They just knew if they retaliated, they would suffer and you wouldn't.
Right. Exactly. It always had like when people say, "Oh, it was the times." I said, Einstein existed at that time. People that weren't just stupid in a certain way. I said there were always people who were progressive during that time. They just weren't in the majority, and they didn't have a news agency that told everybody it was okay to intern the Japanese. All of that wonderful shit that we did. Right? It was the times. Well, it was wrong then too. It was never right. It was never good.
Away with it. That's what I mean when I say condonement of racism. If you are not racist and you marry a man who thinks it's okay to go and shit on Italians, and I'm not picking on them in particular, just throwing out an example. It also, I mean, I'm going to eat some pizza later. I love me some Italian stuff. But if you go and you let him do it, you say nothing, and you go and marry this man, and then your kids grow up and your kids act like that, and you just say, oh, well, what can you do? Then don't sit up here and act like someone's going to respect you or you're worthy of being helped. You created a situation that is never going to affect you in a negative way. That's going to affect an entire group of people in a negative way. But you're acting like you shouldn't have any ramifications for what you did and what you do and what you say. It doesn't matter if you said it as a joke. You can say a funny joke. You can say a racist joke. You can say a funny racist joke. But the joke is also what? Still racist at the end of the day. And what's going to happen when you spread that? People are going to use it as their form of reference for how they think about another group of people, or they're going to repeat it, or they're going to think this is okay for me to do and say around these people. And when you do that, you do nothing but invite more unrest, uncivility, and then we end up back where we are with people thinking, oh, you know what, let's try to get rid of some Jim Crow laws. Which the fact that we have a grown man, Ben Shapiro, I'm gonna go ahead and say his name, a grown man who's literally spent most of his adult life trying to say that Jim Crow laws should be revoked is a fucking problem that for some reason we placate and condone that level of racism. What was the purpose of Jim Crow laws? To stop a racist act and make it illegal on the federal level. And this man is saying, hey, let's remove it. But somehow we're acting.
Yeah, we're past it. It's because what we basically, what the idea is, the new world that they're trying to promote is that we're post-racism, right? There's just disputes
it can exist,
now,
but not in the next couple hundred years.
Yeah. It's like why should we be still taking our penicillin when we no longer have the infection? Is basically what they're trying to say, and that just drives me fucking insane. Well, but what you're saying is very pertinent. It's like Dave Chappelle, who I know is a lightning rod for people, but Chappelle leaves In Living Color.
2.5 years. I've been on stage in 2.5 years, and let me tell you, I've never had my friends ask me so many questions about the world of comedy and show me a video so many times over and ask me, what did I get the wrong impression from this? I'm like, first off, it's all art is subjective. However, I will acknowledge there are some things that were criminally wrong with what he said and contradict other previous jokes / statements that he made, especially in his opinion on anything involving trans. But the main thing I try to tell people is listen to me, and I know that it's not intentional. I cannot fucking speak for everybody based on them having a similar skin tone to me. Also, motherfucker, I'm half Creole. That means half of me is still not allowed to speak on him as an individual, because at the end of the day, he's still a man. Did he say something that a lot of people perceived as stupid? Yes. Does he care that it was stupid? No one can tell.
No.
All we know is that he lied about saying, I would explain what I did at a later date, at a later time of my choosing. Well, you obviously lied because you never gave that later date and later time. You think it's going to blow over, but you realized it wasn't, and now you're just trying to do damage control. Last I checked, I know what he said, and I'm not going to say I don't care. Fuck that. That's the worst thing you can do. I'm going to say if he tried to make it a joke or he tried to make it funny, he didn't present it in the form of a joke, and that's where he fucked up, because he goes from a joke to making a general purpose statement. But at the same time, since he won't talk about it, he keeps fucking up.
Right. Well, yeah, he didn't do it well. But what I was going at was that he leaves in Living. Was it in Living Color? Was that the Chappelle Show? I'm blanking.
It's called Chappelle Show.
Yeah, it was the Chappelle Show. Why did I think in Living Color? But anyway, Chappelle Show. He stops it because he realizes that he's telling these cutting edge jokes, right? And he realizes that racists are not getting it, and they're making the jokes themselves. That they're being colored wrong. And he goes, that's dangerous shit. And so he decides to stop at the height of his career. That was basically his discussion about it, was that, I was saying these funny things, and then I realized that they were being taken the wrong way by the very people that should have been taken out of context. The people who were the brunt of the joke were making the jokes, and they liked me only because I made those kind of jokes. And so it's a little disheartening that later on down the line, he's kind of falling into that thing where he has a lack of empathy around this subject. But I brought that up because of something that you said before about doing comedy and stuff, that there is this thing where you realize that you can't just say it was the times and stuff, because you may be talking about when the time you had support from enemies because you were wrong-headed enough that you were in their right spot. But it's also the thing of realizing that the things that used to be funny, sometimes they're not kept in the same context, and now they're cruel, right? And now they're not right to say. And people are supporting them in this weird past idea. And I think we'll get over it. We tend to get smart enough around this stuff, but I think there's a lot of good hard conversations that are happening, and it's not easy, and we stumble all the time on it. We look like idiots, and you just have to go, listen, I fucked up. So much of this would go away if people just took accountability for the shit that they do.
Thank you, because I know it's this hasn't happened for you. Well, because see, I am not your orthodox writer, if that's even a thing, because the way I got to what I did and the money I got, but the lack of notoriety, it made me humble very quickly. Not that I had an ego about it. So I was always writing things comedically. I got to a point where, because I kind of like audio dramas growing up, because man, was that rare, by the way, back in the day, or hard to find. But I enjoyed audio dramas because I also enjoyed audio books, and sometimes audio books were made almost as if they were an audio drama. So I was coming up with entire pages and pages and pages of a comedy audio drama, and my friends randomly helped me do it from time to time, but it didn't really go anywhere other than me getting an A on a paper one time. And then it somehow spiraled into somebody or whatever seeing this and needing an emergency writer. So I ended up working on some pilots from Chicago. And this is before, the pandemic, way before, like decades. And I was working with a writer's room, and I had no idea. I was the youngest motherfucker in the room. And then eventually that meant me going into stand-up. And one of the things I learned early is that people would tell me, listen, you young, you will say something you may regret. I'm sorry, let me phrase that. Boy, you gonna say something you're going to regret. I was like, well, you remind me of my dad, but listen, don't say you take the joke back. say that you apologize for not being able to make it funny, or apologize for how it's being perceived because you didn't mean for it to be perceived that way. But at the same time, you can't control how people perceived it. All you can do is try to bring clarification on how you made the statement, or what joke or what part you were trying to make funny. But at the same time, some of the people I thought were like the biggest guys ever, and they were legends, and are legends, rampant homophobics, have been homophobic for decades, but they just tried to get quiet when they realized, oh shit, you can get in trouble now, because Mel Gibson was everybody's big wake up call.
Right. It's so funny. I think with jokes as well, and just like horror movies, anything that's an outsider kind of thing, or it's not in the status quo, you also have to just own up that you're trying to straddle a dangerous area. Realize that I'm telling this joke and I might get burnt. I'm trying to maybe get burnt. I'm trying to see how close I can get without getting burnt.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest issues I have with it. It didn't feel, it's not that he didn't need to make the joke. The joke to me felt like, for one thing, it went from being a joke, then him stopping it, which he's known for doing, and people don't realize it, to giving his honest opinion. Like him saying that he was a TERF is not something that made the joke funny, and it didn't even sound like a joke, because the sentence he said was, I am a TERF, and he said it after the joke. So no part of that TERF line sounds like, one, it was funny, two, it was meant to be funny, or B, it was in a comedic context. It sounded like this is the part where he's giving quote unquote streaming consciousness or his actual opinion on something, and that's what bothers me. It's the fact that he thinks he's in trouble for a joke, not so much he thinks he's comprehending he's in trouble because we can't tell if this is your actual opinion or not.
Right. It's a lack. It's rude to say, but it's a lack of courage. You know, you have it's an act of cowardice to hide behind the joke.
Exactly.
It's that simple.
And then it just got 10 times worse when he said, well, I'll choose when I want to talk about it, and I'll choose who I'm going to discuss with it about. I'm like, no, that's not how it works.
I think that's why people are so unhappy, is that he is, whether he likes it or not, he is an object of power. He is a powerful person. He has the ability to, he does. How do you, where does a 500-pound gorilla sit? Anywhere at once. And we're seeing that, and nothing makes a comedian seem less palatable outside of acting in a drama that they take too seriously, is a comedian doing that, being the power person, being the man, right? And that's where it just.
I really do feel bad for him, but it's not bad in the sense that, oh no, he was misinterpreted. It's bad in the sense that I think you did this on purpose, and you're trying to hide that you did it on purpose.
He was trying to be like many times that for any comedian, he's trying to be naughty. You know, he's trying to get a rise because that could be fun. That could be funny. You know, there's the whole aristocrats joke. Aristocrats is for comedians. It's not for audiences. But it's that insolent thing.
Yeah, when I got up to comedic writing as a group for pilots, and then it was the biggest load of shit ever. Like, it was the rise and the fall. I didn't tell people about it because what if the show doesn't get picked up and shit? And apparently my NDA is still valid till 2050, but they only did 4 episodes. But I got brought into that, and they changed the entirety of the first season off of me just making a paragraph about, I don't think you seem to understand that there's a difference between, and this is something I said, there's a difference between making a good story and a joke that features a lesbian versus you making a lesbian the entire punchline for every single episode. And then to top it off, these punchlines, even though they're funny, they're extremely derogatory all the time. I'm not saying don't make these jokes. I'm saying if you make the lesbian the butt of every negative joke in this entire show, you are going to be perceived as homophobic immediately. And this is when you could say you were gay or a lesbian on TV and not immediately, literally, unlike figuratively,
lose your job.
Canceled. Exactly, and lose your job. Because that's why Ellen disappeared for 20 years. She admitted she was a lesbian. Poof. Within 1 year, no one heard from her for 20 years. And they was like, holy shit, you're right. Hey, let's keep you on. Oh, if you ever want to get into writing or try to get a job off this or something, hey, here's my number. Literally, the guy never picked the phone up and the phone was disconnected not even a whole month later. I was like, wow. I had everything I could have ever wanted writing wise, and then I lost it as quickly as I got it. Mind you, that was a nice ass check, but I wasn't even there for the check. I like the idea of being able to, honestly, while I'm doing what I'm doing, podcasting, talk to people about ideas that are meant to be funny or that they're passionate about, much like you, and then seeing what we can build on or where our common ground is. That was the funniest thing about being a writer for 2 different shows that literally never got to their first season because they got cut funding and all other bullshit, and the executives didn't give a shit about the little guy. And well, my lack of ignorance and understanding how everything works, because I'm in Chicago, these guys are literally in California. And that's ironically what led into me doing stand-up when I did it. I didn't find an agent because I thought I was funny. My agent found me because apparently I was funny. Mind you, people think she's dead from COVID because no one's seen her since the start of this shit. And I'm just like, look, I need to get these words and these feelings and these passions out some way. And that's how this whole YouTube thing blew up, because technically my YouTube account has been around for close to a decade, but I didn't take it seriously. I didn't actually get people coming in to look at my stuff until like 2018, right before this stuff kicked off. And then more friends wanted to be involved, not to get attention, but because they liked talking to me and they knew I was funny. And it's become what it is now. This dude the CEO of Clever.fm, which I hope I can get you on there and get you talking to him. The CEO of Clever.fm wants me to be in his podcast distribution network and all this stuff. And I like what they're doing, because you can look up an automatic transcription of everything that's said and go and find specific statements instead of having to comb through an hour or 20 or 30 minutes of someone talking to find a statement. And it's patent pending. And I was like, bro, I want to interview you next on my show, because you're doing something that's evolutionary, literally evolutionary for the world of podcasting. And you're not doing it for money. You're doing it because you actually love this stuff and you grew up with it, right? So he's probably going to get interviewed after him. I don't know if you want to talk to him or anything, but I can definitely make sure at a bare minimum you're linked up, because he loves passionate people who do podcasts, and he doesn't want to do nothing but build them up and promote them and network them.
That's wonderful. Sure.
With that being said, I definitely appreciate you coming. I didn't have a set time that this was going to run for, and I'm not even mad that we blew past my estimate of a time frame. This is not going to be a labor. This is going to be a labor of love to edit. And, you know, if you ever want to come on in the future, or if you want to drop me links to anything or any recommendations you think I should get into, whether it's horror or people around horror, let me know, because I'm always looking for interview guests. They don't always find me like your agents did.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Zax, for having me on. This has been great. This is, we really blew through the time. I haven't had one go this long in a long, long time. So this was a pleasure, and I thank you for having me on. And of course, if anybody's interested, they can find Hellbent for Horror, my podcast, on any of the podcast places that you would normally look, Apple, iTunes, all of that. If you're looking for the book, you can go to my website, hellbentforhorror.com. And on there, there's a book page. I also have a page of books that I recommend. And so a lot of the things that I've talked about today are listed there, and many, many, many that I didn't remember to put on there are also there. If you decide to get the book, you can get it through Amazon or Barnes and Noble and stuff like that. But on my webpage where my book is, if you're interested in helping out the small business person during this time of the pandemic, I have my ISBN number up there, which is the number for the book that any bookseller can get it ordered for you. Any bookseller that you know, especially the indies, the mom and pops, they'd be overjoyed to order a book for you through their place. So if you decide to do that, it's right there.
And I, as always, whenever we have a guest, I will try to make sure as many links as they want me to will be in the description for YouTube. And they'll also be in the comment section, as well as the description on any other platforms such as iTunes and Spotify, Verbal, all those people. So with that being said, I definitely appreciate it. I look forward to doing anything with you in the future. And I will see you when I see you. And much appreciated. And you give me hope for when I get old, because I want to, when I am old, I do not want to be a bitter Clint Eastwood hard ass. I want to be that almost like Cheech and Chong channeled vibe guy who just grew up with George Carlin but isn't as angry as George Carlin. And I appreciate you giving me that optimism to show me that it existed.